It boils down to opportunity and succession. In terms of opportunity, I mean that if there is a good guy who is able to take the lead, then that opportunity might not be there tomorrow. Timing is everything. And then, that clicked in place. And then by succession, perhaps I wouldn't have held the position anyway until the end of times. So really, when a good candidate comes along, it's very nice to be able to give others the chance to lead as well. We have a Latvian company who we're hoping to onboard still this year that can bring significant volumes. There's an interesting UK company that is at the last stages of due diligence. I think first quarter latest we'll have new LOs joining, and hopefully ones that can actually provide the volumes for us and also for the investors. And obviously you hear always, the moment something is delayed, you hear some investors say, go blow them up. But they've been in constant communication with us. We know the issue. We've been working on it. Say there is no doubt, at least in our head, that then anything funny would be going on the background. I believe this week, next week, we'll see the 500K. People will get their money with interest, and then that case is closed, and we'll look at Vivus later down the line as a separate new onboarding if the new Mexico comes, and then see what can be done. We will start paying down the principal to the investors in tranches, and we as income will match. So whatever we come up now as a payment plan with them. So what we're saying that in case they fail that best payment plan, then income will bridge a certain amount up to a certain amount, the principal payments towards the investors.
What's up, guys? This is Danny from Rethink Peer-to-Peer Lending. Before we jump right into the conversation with Income founder Kimmo, a few words from my side regarding the scope of this brand new podcast called Income Insights. The idea behind this podcast is fairly simple. Income wants to add yet another layer of communication in order to help the investor community to get a better understanding about the current challenges that the platform is facing. Being an investor on Income myself since almost the very beginning, I'm aware of many difficulties behind the scenes, so hopefully my questions can help to close the knowledge gap between platform and investors while keeping an eye on current events as well as future plans. Income Insights will be a recurring podcast on a monthly basis, so if you enjoy what you're hearing, make sure to subscribe on all relevant streaming platforms, or alternatively join the YouTube channel of Income if you want to add some visuals as well. So without further ado, let's jump right into the first episode of Income Insights. Income Insights episode number 1. Kimmo, good to see you. Please let the audience know how you are today.
Well, Danny, nice to be here. I'm good, like always, I guess. And happy to talk to you. Happy to be part of the podcast now.
Yeah, likewise. It's obviously a new beginning, a new venture. Maybe to start off, I was wondering, podcasts, is that something that you're fond of? Do you enjoy listening to podcasts? And is it for you also personally the first time, being active in a, podcast position now on a regular basis?
It is the first time. I mean, I've done some, guest appearances, but this is the first one where kind of we are the initiator of the podcast idea. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts, usually while driving or in the gym. It's a good format.
You want to name a few?
Joe Rogan has a really some interesting ones with like latest was with Elon Musk just over the Halloween. What else? Some other small ones related to real estate, some fintech podcasts. Anderson Horowitz had some on the VC world and future technology. So I guess those are the main ones that I have in my Spotify.
All right. Probably good to know for someone. Joe Rogan, obviously quite popular, but then we can see former Income CEO Kimmo, as we have to say now, which will be elaborating in a second, is also quite fond of some fintech or podcasts from the financial environment. Yeah, maybe let's talk about the agenda for today, just very roughly. I was thinking about that we can obviously address the recent change at the CEO position. I also want to cover some general LO developments, and then also go a bit more into detail about two specific ones, about Vivus and ClickCash. Let's say the two biggest, smallest problem childs currently in the income portfolio. But maybe we just start off with the most recent change, or with the most recent news, which is obviously that Lavrenti Sudakov is the new CEO at Income. You've been like in this position as the majority shareholder of Income since the beginning of the platform. Why were you now stepping down from this position?
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, I've grown it now since the start. I think around 2.5 years. I've held the CEO and founder position. In that time, we've reached around 4,500, a little bit more active investors, also around 13 million of investments outstanding. And so all in all, very interesting time to build a business from scratch. A lot of hours going into it, sometimes more than you have to spare. So I also have a 2.5-year-old daughter now. So I like to spend some time with the family as well. So those personal reasons in terms of time constraints of really building a startup, running the CEO, running all the other functions as well, was something that I started talking with our main equity investors over the summer, and said that, I see there's a few strategic things that are upcoming. One of them is a potential regulatory license during 2024, so next year, funding rounds, and then obviously new LO onboarding part as well. So these are the ones that really make the biggest difference in terms of what I look at it, and general business development, obviously. And I just started seeing that there's a whole lot of bureaucracy on my table as well, which I'm a professional CEO. I've done it for most of my life, but I don't really enjoy it that much. And then came the thought that, okay, Lavrenti's been with us for a very long time already. He's been helping us. He's a very good guy, very process-driven, detail-oriented, and the team likes him as well. So the idea just came that, okay, what if he would take the CEO position? And we bounced the idea, together. And really then, I asked Lavrenti, would he be willing to take the hat? And he said, yeah, absolutely. He shares the same vision as I do in terms of where Income can go. I said, yeah, I'm happy to take that. So I think it boils down to, even personal reasons aside, or time constraints, it boils down to opportunity and succession. So in terms of opportunity, I mean that if there is a good guy who is able to take the lead, then that opportunity might not be there tomorrow. So timing is everything. And then, that clicked in place. And then by succession, perhaps I wouldn't have held the position anyway until the end of times. So really, when a good candidate comes along, it's very nice to be able to give others the chance to lead as well, and kind of like, take a higher role in a business. So there's not, to give them a chance also to show what they're made of. So those are the main things why we decided then that, okay, let's do this, and give me the time to focus on those things which are the more important ones in my own personal understanding: new LOs, regulatory license, funding round. And I think I can give more in those roles when I'm focusing only on certain aspects of the business.
Well, honestly, my initial thought when I heard about the news was, okay, obviously I understand the separation between the strategic thinking and work. On the other side, the more day-to-day operational duties that you have. But at the same time, I feel like, okay, the CEO position is, in a sense, also just like something for the outside looking at it. So it's more of a symbolic thing in a way. It doesn't need to be like, like a strict distinguishing between this is operational, this is strategic. I can relate to the point, like you want to have like a qualified guy within your core team to step up to this occasion, and then maybe also like time a bit longer to the company. But at the same time, you know, is it like, couldn't you have just maintained that position also and just like, you know, sharing, let's say, or delegate more of the workload behind the scenes, and then just like continue to be the face, the ongoing face that income is, or that many investors are also used to at income, with yourself being at the forefront?
Well, probably yes. I guess it's a matter of structure. I think, you know, me doing the podcasts, being still, let's call it the face as a sort of an active founder. And obviously Lavrenti can do his own PR as much as he wants. There's no strict division in that sense. Yes, probably it could have been done. On the other hand, I'd like to think that if you empower someone to do something and run, then they should have that empowerment fully, and not as a sort of a, how would I say, a ghost manager or whatever you may call it. So I thought that this is a better way of going forward, and then our equity investors also agreed with my logic. So yeah, I mean, I guess you could have done it this way or that way. We just ended up doing it this way, and you know, we've seen other platforms as well. Well, Mintos has a founder shareholder, CEO still for a long time, but then you have other platforms where, for example, Esketit, I think a more or less hired CEO from the start. Lender market obviously going through changes, but also a hired CEO as such. And through the option plan, I think Lavrenti is very well aligned to do what's best for the company. So I guess it's a matter of preference, to be honest, which way to do it.
Fair enough. I guess when there's like some continuity, unlike with other platforms where there seem to be like ongoing changes on a, not monthly, but let's say on a recurring basis, leaving the frequency aside, but this is also kind of leaving investors in a weird position. So as long, I think, like if you have a good feeling about Lavrenti that he could be a long-term solution, then in my personal view, it's no reason why he couldn't step up to the occasion, so to say, as long as there's some continuity involved. Thinking about the CEO change, I was kind of thinking like maybe this is also a good opportunity for you to kind of present also a bit the team that is operating income in the background, because I think like on the team page we see a couple of shareholders, we see your face obviously, but maybe you can give a little insight as far as how many people are working in the background on a day-to-day basis for income, and how the company is structured to make it run then also on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so I think we're today around 9 people, and then of course the outsourced services. So just to outline the names or a few people: Lavrenti, obviously now CEO, everyday management process, trying to improve things as much as he can. Maciej then on the head of LO due diligence. So he's basically responsible for figuring out the LO loan books, what's the advance rate, you know, what kind of companies we can onboard. We have a compliance officer in Hendrik, so he's responsible for the AML and KYC. These are basically the big things in today's world, especially when dealing with banks or any payment providers. So you need to have a dedicated person, preferably a bit more for that, depending on requirements. We have Jason, who's the LO onboarding manager, so he's responsible for the new LO sales. Steffi, marketing and sales, right? So a lot of people probably have seen her in some of the conferences we've gone to. Anastasia, our main customer care lead, so she's the one in charge of Telegram. Then we have Roger in finance and Yuri in CTO, And then, of course, myself focused on business development and the things that I outlined before. And we really, we had an in-house legal before, but we thought that actually makes more sense to buy that as a service in. So we're cooperating with some of the leading companies or law firms in the Baltics to buy in the legal know-how when needed. So this is the agreement law when we onboard new LOs, for example. Likewise, I mean, developers, we're using some our external developers, so I don't put them into headcount, and these are on a need to hire basis. What we're doing, and then accountants, other things. These are also outsourced services. So I'd say 9 people total in-house, and then plenty external ones.
Okay, thanks for those insights. I guess we could now switch to the more heavier topics, so to say. Let's talk about some LO developments. Now, before we talk specifically about ClickCash and also Vivus, I was curious to hear your opinion about the overall LO development on income. Obviously, in the past, we have seen a lot of cash drag, decreasing loan supply. And now I recently had a look on the statistics page. Right now, Dana Rupiah, Huvi, and ITF, they make up around 90% of the outstanding portfolio now on the platform. We see that the assets under management are now balancing in the past 5-6 months between 10-30 million euros. I'm curious, like, are there any new LOs coming, or do you see maybe more growth coming from the existing already onboarded LOs? Please, just a very short answer, like, where do you see the growth coming from in the future?
Current ones, yes. I mean, it's obvious we see that the main ones are there. And I think if you look at the current ones, the ones you listed, those are the ones where the growth will come. Talking about purely about the current ones, the smaller ones seem to be stable, or they seem to have even decreased, and to the extent that it potentially is long-term, not even relevant in that sense. In terms of the new ones, it's a very tough market to attract new ones at the moment. It's a funny situation. The fintechs are all out of cash, meaning that they need funding, but at the same time, they're running around like crazy from one deal to another. So what we've seen is the sales cycles have gone very long. That said, we have a Latvian company who we're hoping to onboard still this year that can bring significant volumes. There's an interesting UK company that is at the last stages of due diligence. And then we still have Mexico, which is a little bit of a difficult structure, but soon to be cracked. So that has a lot of potential. So I think first quarter latest, we'll have new LOs joining, and hopefully ones that can actually provide the volumes for us and also for the investors.
Which volumes would we speak realistically, just exclusively coming from the new ones?
Well, I mean, let's say, and I'll go to it in the ClickCash when we go through those guys. What we've noticed also that the smaller loan books are a little bit problematic in terms of also the security function. So I would say that we are aiming at LOs that can bring in at least 500,000 in the first go. And then probably 2 million should be the short-term goal in terms of listing, the initial listing. So they should be able to grow to 2 million about in a very, very short time frame. And then that would be interesting to us. I guess for us, the sweet spot, if we can attract the LOs that can take 5 to 10 million of funding, then those would be the very good customers. And I think if you look at Mintos, 10 is about where they start actually. So they're looking at the next tier, the more established, well, not more established ones, the ones that are able to list significantly more.
Sure. Which obviously makes sense considering their size to not just, like break their heads over small lenders. Okay, yeah, then let's dig a bit deeper into 2 specific lenders. Now, first off, Vivus in Mexico. Obviously a situation where many people were a bit like confused. What was the reason for the ongoing delay? I think right now it's about 6-7 weeks. since there was a substantial amount of buybacks not coming in. In the meantime, there was around, I think, 900,000 euros being transferred to income. But as of this moment, as we speak, I think it's still around 500,000 left. Can you explain the reasons for the delay here?
Yeah, correct. Vivus basically started, I think they listed their last, and that's Vivus Mexico, through the business loan structure. They started they stopped listing around new loans around May, I think, this year. And then essentially they were winding down their book. The idea was there that, I think as we communicated to people as well, that we would be looking at in the future, can we do direct listings with them directly to Mexico, so that the underlying loans would be directly assigned instead of through the current structure. But they had some IT pipeline issues and other things, so we thought, okay, let's scale it down and then look at it separately, what the cooperation may be in the future. Now, during that wind down, and as you mentioned, you're right, around 500,000 is outstanding. I think around 1.5 million outstanding was where they started hitting some issues, and those issues were mainly related to bank transfers and mainly documentation related. So that's what we've been working on to have their bank understand the crowdfunding structure through legal opinions, through other things, saying like, this is actually a valid, solid structure, right? So this has involved some legal opinions and other things which we've delivered. And unfortunately, bureaucracy always takes a lot of time. So that's where the delays have come from mainly. But from 1.5, the reason why we haven't escalated was that we're out of 1.5. And obviously you hear always, the moment something is delayed, you hear some investors say, go blow them up. But they've been in constant communication with us. We know the issue, we've been working on it. And they've delivered now 1 million out of what was outstanding, as they've promised in those tranches that they've been able to get down. 500,000 is outstanding. I believe last week final documentation, or at least what we think today is final documentation, was sent to them so they can disclose it to their bank and otherwise. And I believe now they're ready to transfer the final 500. Once that balance is at zero, we'll take a look what and if can be done direct with them in Mexico. But that probably requires another due diligence on their loan book, and it's going to be a longer process to assess all of the normal onboarding things, what we do.
Can you make me understand? Obviously, like, I can understand that maybe certain banks have difficulties understanding certain transactions, but I think once, let's say, a substantial amount goes through, like in the range of 1 million euro, there's 500,000, like there's like a 500,000 euro left. Why is it not going through all in once? Or why would the bank not understand, like, okay, this is a similar transaction, it's actually half the size to put it through? So why is there additional documentation then required, which makes it from the outside maybe looking a bit like strange?
Weird. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a good question, something that we also, have asked ourselves here in the office a few times. But generally, every time there's a transaction done, the bank may and generally will ask additional documentation. And, if you have, or let's say, payment services provider. So every single time there's a transfer, it may trigger an AML KYC check, which then in turn needs to be gone through with their, not always the same people in the banks, larger banks work on these things. So you might end up in a place where they say, okay, the previous documentation was fine, but actually we would like to understand let's say the legal aspect of this and this better, or we would like to understand what are the balances that you're transferring. So really it is I guess what I mentioned before when I spoke about Henrik and the team, the AML KYC, it's such a hot topic, and the banks are, to a certain extent, have gone crazy with these kind of things. especially when it relates to jurisdictions outside of Europe. So, as an example, Vietnam and some other countries were just put on the high-risk lists. Also, Croatia went to the high-risk lists. These are jurisdictions that we'd rather avoid in terms of loan originators, just because we know that this may cause problems with the banks. And it's just the modern world, I guess, and the Ukrainian war didn't do the thing any easier overall in the world.
Was it like an initial transfer that was like targeting those 1.5 million euro and then just 1 million went through? Or because it may come across as well, like, okay, the initial idea was just to send around 900,000 to start off and then transfer the remaining balance later on?
No, I think the way it went, that everything was, they were paying down the balance quite normally. And then at some point, the bank said, hey, we need to have an understanding of this. And then it took quite a bit of time for the bank to go. And the bank said, I believe, said that, continue the payments while we look into this. Then they flagged, okay, this is a problem. We need to understand this more. Meanwhile, some money had come. Then, they managed to send a little bit more after the bank had looked, and the bank looked at it again. Okay, we need this and this. So really, it's a juggle on their AML and KYC. But the good thing is that obviously that everything is in order, the documentation is in order, and there's no, how would I say, there is no doubt, at least in our head, that then anything funny would be going on the background. So I believe this week, next week, we'll see the 500K, people will get their money with interest, and then that case is closed, and we'll look at Vivus later down the line as a separate new onboarding if the new Mexico comes, and then see what can be done.
Okay, and just to wrap it up one more time, it's basically a learning for income to look closer to AML policies in certain jurisdictions to understand, like, okay, as you said, like this is now the red list or the black list, to have certain allows not from specific countries because you fear like this could, cause also future problems. So is there now also like Mexico kind of like a hidden or like a forbidden spot in a sense, or?
Yeah. No, I think in terms of, it's very clear that if you have these high risk jurisdictions in terms of money laundering, where Vietnam and Croatia went to the lists, then it's clear that if we would onboard from those jurisdictions, it will most likely cause problems, most likely. Obviously, if these companies have all the AML documentation that we go anyway through during the LO, when we onboard them, what is the source of funds, who are your owners, all of that. If everything is perfect, then probably we can still onboard from those, but we need to be extra careful. So in terms of Mexico, in terms of, LATAM, whatever jurisdictions, I don't expect problems per se, just because of the jurisdiction. What we need to understand is, what is the fallback plan if a bank, and this is the LO's bank, for example, starts asking additional questions. So so that's shortly put the thing, that it's a learning in that sense, that these things can happen in today's world. But if the company has its numbers and papers in check, it's only a delay, not as such, not critical.
Maybe one more little follow-up on this. So just to make investors understand, is that something that is purely driven by, let's say, the legal environment in a certain country, or is it sometimes even the bank itself that has certain standards in place, which maybe also could trigger issues like this?
It's purely the banks, right? So if you look at EU banks today, and I can see it and hear it from a lot of friends as well, totally, let's call it legit people, might have businesses abroad. The amount of AML, KYC questionnaires coming from the banks these days in EU it has gone through the roof. So it's really something you can't predict. When does the bank want to take a look, and they really need to do it, and the push comes from the regulator. in each jurisdiction. So for Estonian banks, it's the Estonian FSA that tells them that, guys, you need to look at these and these and these on a very specific level. So very difficult to predict when such issues might arise, but then I have to, focus on the fact that if we do all the LO checks in the start, AML, KYC, beneficial owners, everything at the start before we onboard. We disclose this documentation also to our bank before we start the cooperation and to the partners, money transfer partners, so that there wouldn't be such surprises. But you never know, bank policies might change. They might look at things differently today than they did before. They might need extra information. But as I said, as long as the company, the LO, has all its numbers and papers in check, then it's only a delay, not really a problem as such.
A matter of time then, basically.
A matter of time, correct.
All right, then let's switch to ClickCash. As far as I understand, there is some, as far as ClickCash is concerned, I feel like there's always a solution in the air. And I think we've been talking about this throughout the entire year. Now, from what I understood now with the very recent news, which you haven't communicated publicly as we speak right now, what can you share about progress with the Brazilian lender?
Yeah, you're right. There's really been a lot of solutions on the table, a lot of thoughts on the table. They've managed to pay down their debt a little bit, and we've communicated as it has come. Really, I think we've reached the point now that where we thought as in income, and this is the potential solution, is that ClickCash is trying to get itself sorted. We have no guarantees that it will happen, and we understand that investors are agitated at the least of all of these delays. So I think the proposed solution that we will communicate later down the line is that we will start paying down the principal to the investors in tranches. So, and we as income will match. So whatever we come up now as a payment plan with them. So what we're saying that in case they fail that business, that payment plan, then income will bridge a certain amount, up to a certain amount, the principal payments towards the investors. The reason why we thought of this solution is that it's taken really very long, and I think investors need to have some sort of a clear schedule in head or in mind, that how is this thing going to unwind itself. And that's basically the main logic what we're thinking, and then we'll deal with ClickCash ourselves, and we'll continue working. But at least we can let's call it guarantee some cash flow towards the investors, and that's basically today what we're talking. It's still pending a few answers from IT, and I believe we can get this plan communicated hopefully this week or latest the next, once we get some final documentation and some final IT answers.
Okay, so put it in simple terms, there will be a fixed amount coming now from ClickCash every month according to the repayment schedule. And if ClickCash fails, income, I think, as far as I know, would be then also the first marketplace ever to also, in case this agreement would fail from ClickCash side, jump in, bridge the payment and pay from its own bank account, basically the outstanding amount, which has been agreed on a monthly basis.
Yeah, we'll top whatever comes from ClickCash. So we'll come up with some sort of a payment plan with them, as you said. Whatever they are missing from the payment plan, what they can, up to the point what we're thinking. I don't have the final number today, but let's say according to that, we will then say that we'll top it up to that amount. So we know that the investors will only get, so the investors will get what has been communicated. That said, the logic here is that I think it's been dragging so long that we need to have a solution. That's the main driver for it. And this is something I've spoken with our investors as well. We need to have a plan there. Now, as a closing thought, maybe on ClickCash, and I think we're running out of time, maybe a bit, but the idea there is that, or what we've learned from it, is really that the small loan books are difficult. And this is also a little bit of a driver to what we're saying, that 500,000 to 2 million to whatever needs to be the minimum on the platform for it to make sense, is that when we are looking at ClickCash, 150,000 roughly outstanding. Now, if we would today go to lawyers, if we would go to, a backup provider and really escalate, it's now 1/3 of that book. And then, from my personal perspective, I'd rather say that, let's use this cash to make the investors whole in the principal part, at least, if possible, instead, and then deal with ClickCash, see where it goes without escalation. This is our learning. Small loan books are more dangerous than big ones, because the fixed cost of collection, even if we know and we still think that the security function works as it should, the problem comes when the fixed costs of executing on it relative to the small loan book become too high. That's where you're looking at a problem. So it's a learning curve, something we didn't expect back when, but such is business. And we hope we have a good solution on the table at the moment. So,
okay, thanks for sharing those insights. And I guess once we reach the next episode, we can then go a bit deeper into how it went down and talk also the numbers that are on the table. And then we can go a bit more in depth at the next episode. Maybe just to wrap up very briefly and quickly this first episode, maybe just a smaller topic. I was wondering, like, following up the Telegram chat, there's always there seem to be a lot of notifications once new loans become available. ITF 15%, Dana Rupiah 15% now available, and I've been too late, whatever. I was wondering, do you have a fixed uploading schedule for your assets for specific LOs? Something that you can maybe implement so investors are always aware, when new assets coming to the platform, if they come at least a specific point in time.
Yeah, I guess the problem there is yes, we can put those probably, and what we've told also to the LOs is that you could divide your listings more evenly, but the end result is that as long as there is such high investor demand versus too little assets, then the auto invests do grab most of it, or you have these people who can, who go there manually, and good for them, and grab those before the auto invests kick in. So yes, we can try to have some more listing of schedules, and this is something, like I said, what we've discussed, but in the end it will not solve the problem of too much investor demand versus too little assets. So the main point here, what we're trying to work is with the LOs, is actually how can we get them to increase the total amount of assets they list. And that's what we have. It works today with ITF. We're talking with Dana Rupiah on some certain things. Also, Huobi has expressed its will to list additional products. But as all of these, in our case, require a separate due diligence on the loan book to understand the product properly, then this causes a little bit. It's not just as simple as saying to them, guys, tomorrow go and list, which it might be on some other platforms, not knowing their processes, but we need to look at the book and understand it before we allow new products.
All right. Thanks for those for this short answer. Yeah, we're coming towards an end, Kimmo. Income Insights episode number 1. Thanks to all the listeners that joined the very first podcast episode. If you want, obviously subscribe. The Income Podcast will be available on all relevant streaming platforms. Alternatively, there will be a version also on YouTube. So if you want, either way, take where you can get the information. And I say, yeah, thanks, Kimmo, for answering a couple of questions. And then we follow up for sure then the next month and pick up again on a few topics regarding income. Thanks for taking the time.
Good. Thank you, Denny. It was a pleasure. Talk soon.